Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Tom here with Innova Digital, and today we're going to go through how I built out this video podcasting studio in about 200 square feet. So when I set out to build this space, there were a couple of must-have things that were going to be important for me. So coming from the video background, having it be a video podcasting studio was absolutely top priority, right? So I wanted to have at least 3 cameras. That way I can get a wide shot of the room as well as a dedicated shot to either side of the table or to either party. I wanted to have 4 microphones so that in case we wanted to have groups of 4 in here, we could. Also wanted the space to be modular, that if we didn't have 4 people and we just had 2 people or 3 people, that the space could be adapted to kind of suit those needs. Another huge thing for me was that I wanted to have the ability to live cut each episode. And so what I mean by that is typically when people would be doing stuff like this, they would hit record on all 3 cameras and then take all of that footage, go into the editing room and change things and cut things that way. And I knew pretty much immediately that I didn't want to do that because I have enough editing work as it is, and I don't want the extra editing of doing every individual podcast. I'll go into what that gear is and what specifically it is in a minute, but as you can imagine, that is from Blackmagic in the A10 Mini series. And so that speeds the workflow of everything up entirely because everything gets live cut here. And so basically the editing is minimal. You're adding a little bit of a header, a footer, some pop-up text, and you're calling it a day. In fact, you could even program that sort of stuff into the A10 software if you needed to do that. Another thing that was really important to me is I really wanted to have the space look professional and kind of cohesive without being overly cluttered or overly stylized. The look of things fairly minimal, and so far I feel like that has worked out well for me, and I think that it does give off a good result that I was looking for. And then finally, as I've kind of alluded to, I wanted everything to be as easy as possible. So everything that is in this space is pretty much stuck here. It stays here. I don't move it around. So when somebody comes in or wants to do a podcast, we can just hit go pretty much. There's very minimal setup. And then by the time we hit done on the recording, I basically can take that file, upload it to Dropbox for them, and they can be on their way. Everything is very quick and easy, and that just saves me a whole bunch of time, and I assume it will for you too. All right, so let's dive into the gear a little bit more. This is probably the boring section, but let's just talk about furniture and things that I did to kind of fill out the space. So first and foremost, I needed a table. I wanted one that was probably more newsroom style, kind of like a half crescent shaped thing, but frankly, it was really tough to find, and doing a custom build desk just probably wasn't in the cards for me starting out. And so I decided to go with this table. It has a beautiful gray top. It's thick, sturdy wood, and it can house 4 people, if not more. And in fact, there's even a nice cable pass through throughout the table too, which is super nice. So this was kind of the main table. I had 4 matching kind of office chairs. There's nothing too special about these, but felt nice, comfortable, looked good. Again, kind of clean cut and professional, maybe more so than stylized. I've noticed that some people start giving it the old wiggle, and that is not as ideal, but that's more of a self-restraint thing than anything else. Aside from that, there's a nice thick rug underneath us that hopefully absorbs some of the sound. I'd say the biggest thing aside from the table and the chairs, I guess, is this backdrop over here to my left, and so that is pretty unique. I've noticed that this sort of 3D wall panel thing is a little bit more trendy these days, but I found ones that I haven't really found online as much. They're at 2 feet, I think a little bit bigger than most other ones, and they kind of give off, it doesn't look like you can see where they start and end like most tiles, so I really liked that. I think it looks good. I probably have some footage of how I built this thing, but I didn't want to glue them to the wall because gluing things to walls, especially in a space that I just lease, was not something that I had an interest in doing. So I guess the only final thing is to kind of seal this space off. I did put in 2 kind of big curtain systems, which is one of them you see behind me, and there's one on the other side there, to kind of just basically kind of create a room, kind of give off the illusion that there is a room here. And that hopefully absorbs a little bit of sound. It gives people clean backdrops behind them so you can't see the rest of the studio. I think that it looks good and it works great, and that's another thing that I didn't have to drill into the walls. So that's the furniture. Let's dive into audio. So as you guys could probably tell, I opted to go with the Rodecaster and pod mic setup here. So there are 4 pod mics. I did a bunch of research on these, and I feel like they kind of live up to the hype. For the price, they are extremely great quality. Sure, I would have preferred to go with, you know, SM7Bs or something like that, but these are about a fourth of the price. For, you know, this being a new venture, and something that I thought most people probably wouldn't have the ear to notice the difference with, I decided to go with the pod mics. And so far they've been great. I think they look great too, which has actually been a huge thing. I know that a lot of people opt to do windscreens over them or something like that, but seeing as we're kind of a video first podcasting space, as of now, we're going to leave them like this. I think they look really cool. You also probably noticed that that's not on a boom arm or you know, one of those, I don't know. I have one of those at the house and it's great, but I wanted people not to be fidgeting with it. I also felt like to get 4 of them was kind of expensive, and I think that they are just really ugly to have on camera. I thought that just doing a straight tabletop mount was going to be the way to go on these. It does come with the downside of if people are smacking the table, you might get a little bit of noise off of that, which I know is not quite as great, but I think that this setup just looks clean, and it's still able to be modular enough that, again, if we don't have 4 people on the show, we can just rip 2 of them, basically put them on the floor or something like that, quickly move them. We don't have to unscrew the arms. So basically these run XLR into the Rodecaster system, which, again, tons of other reviews. I won't talk about the Rodecaster system, but I think it's kind of industry standard for people that are wanting to do a podcast. No complaints with the Rodecaster system. The headphones, in case people do want to listen, so I actually have them below the table here. They are Mackie MC100s, and so I bought 4 of them. They sit below the table here, and frankly, I usually tell people that unless you really want to hear yourself, you don't need to, because it's pretty much a thing that it's not going to matter to you. I monitored the audio on my end. There's nothing you can really do with the hearing of things. So, and I think it also leaves a little bit of a distraction or something to deal with. So there are headphones if people would like to use them, but not something that I put a lot of thought into. So on the video front, again, I said I wanted 3 cameras, right? So we have a little bit of a hodgepodge setup, but it was just kind of stuff that I had laying around. And stuff that I felt like was going to be probably good enough for what I needed it to do, right? So the center camera is actually what we're shooting on now, which is the A7 III. There's a Samyang like 18mm wide angle lens on there. And then the 2 side cameras, there's an A6000 and A6300. The A6000 and A6300 are basically just running the kit lenses. The A6000 won't do 4K like the 6300 will, but the ATEM actually can't take in anything past 1080, so everything just gets run in 1080. And so that was another reason I was like, I might as well just keep things pretty cheap. And from as far as I can tell, with a little bit of like color balancing and such like that, I've been able to get all 3 cameras to look pretty cohesive together and not feel like there's like a drastic quality loss or a cheaper camera in the mix. Those are built into what I just kind of call the command center desk. And basically those are pitched in the corners. The main camera is suspended off of what I do for lighting. There's just a big C-stand in the middle of it. And so this was a great setup where, again, I didn't want tripods and things that you could be tripping over or having to set up camera especially. So they're just kind of bolted into the table. And, you know, I luckily had thought it out enough and figured that with a setup like this, basically you can get the right angle that I was looking for without having to do something crazy with the cameras. So I'm really happy with how those are looking, and so far everything has been great on that front. So let's talk about the lighting setup and how that looks, right? So the main light here, this is what I'm using now, is a newer dish. I'm not quite sure the size, but I'd say it's a fairly good size. I originally purchased a lantern style thing that I thought would fill out the space a little bit more, but I was unable to get the skirt that goes around it to kind of control the light a little bit more. And luckily this thing has been great. So this gets boomed in just off of a C-stand. There is an SL60W, a Godox SL60W that is the key light. And that basically just is boomed in straight over top of the 4 people. So it's a pretty even light that gets sprayed across. I think it probably bounces off the table a little bit. And so far I haven't had any issues with that. The hair light are basically these small LED bicolor, probably newer light panels as well. I'm sure just about anything would do pretty well here, but these are affixed to the ceiling basically, along with the curtains, and kind of give me that hair light that you hopefully can see here. And that just kind of helps separate people from the background because the curtains are maybe 2.5 feet behind people talking here. So those are the two main lights. I usually leave those on a nice warm orange, and this is obviously a more pure white light. I'm not quite sure what the, I want to say like 5600 or something like that. I do custom white balances on all the cameras to kind of dial things in a little bit more, but between those things, I think things look pretty good. I guess the only other lighting contribution is the wall panel, and that there is that LED strip that you can kind of change around there, which again, I think gives it a little bit of color, a little bit of vibrance, and a little bit of differentiation between different shows, and a way to kind of customize your experience with everything. So bringing everything full circle, here is kind of the workflow on how things work from an audio video perspective. So audio captured from the Rode mics, XLR'd into the Rodecaster Pro system. I record internally on the Rodecaster Pro system, so people do have an instant audio file only of the performance. But what I do is I take one of the outputs from the Rodecaster and I plug that into the ATEM Mini Pro ISO, which is my live switcher for the cameras. So those two pieces of gear are the biggest powerhouses of this whole thing. I haven't had any issues with any sort of delay. I noticed that some people probably have, but I've noticed that running audio directly out from the Rodecaster Pro into the ATEM Mini ISO works flawlessly and great, to be honest. The reason that I went with the ATEM Mini Pro ISO was a couple of reasons. If you want to have any sort of live viewing, like a live monitor out, which I have on just a everyday kind of computer screen here that I can see what's happening and live cut it, you need to upgrade to the Pro from the ATEM Mini. And then what you get with the ISO is you basically get the ability to record all of the camera inputs individually. So how this works is you're basically taking the clean HDMI out from each of these cameras that go into the ATEM Mini and recording off of that. You don't need to have SD cards in the cameras to be recording. There is no every camera is going to get individually recorded unless I turn on the ISO mode, which again creates massive files. But if you did want to have that flexibility of being able to go back and individually cut things or handle the editing a little bit more specifically in post, I thought that that would be a useful thing to have and worthwhile doing. So that's why I went with the ISO. But to bring it back, the three cameras feed into the ATEM Mini Pro ISO, and then basically that is recorded live switched by me to a Samsung T5 SSD hard drive. I have heard and I've done enough research and I've talked to Blackmagic support about this, and they said that you should definitely get a T5 SSD, and I haven't had any trouble with that. So formatted that, everything runs into there. The beauty of this whole thing is that once I name what the project or the file is going to be, I plug in the hard drive, I hit go, the audio is synced up, everything is clean coming from the Rodecaster Pro, runs into the ATEM, the cameras are already all set, white balanced, everything, the angles look great. You live switch that, and by the time you hit end, it'll spit out a finished file, finished in that sense, a finished file that you're ready to pretty much go and use. You don't have to go through and kind of just recut all the cameras and stuff like that, which is saving me and everyone else a huge chunk of time. So if you're a solo man operation, this whole setup might not be as ideal for you, because you would still need to switch things yourself, which I see people do, but I assume that I will be, or someone else be, running the podcast from the other side of this table here for the majority of the work. And so that kind of just keeps everything super easy. So when clients come in, they have the ability to pretty much leave shortly after. I'll just upload something to Dropbox immediately, and they can see what they recorded for that day, which is a huge plus. One thing I didn't talk about much was the acoustic side of thing, and frankly, this is the thing that probably needs the most improvement here as of now. There are some things happening behind the scenes to get this better. I think it would have been better if we had a dedicated room to this, but the space that I'm in just didn't have that as an option, so we kind of had to make do. So there are a series of acoustic panels on the back wall there. We will be putting in sound blankets that are going to be bolted to the ceiling to hopefully help some of the reverb there. There's a whole bunch of extra space on that side of the studio that I think a lot of the sound echoes off of, and so we're having a couple of additional sound blankets and curtains put in over there. And I think between those changes, as well as the fairly thick carpet that's beneath us, and the just great technology for the noise canceling that's built into these mics and in the Rodecaster, I think we'll be pretty much set to a point, especially where people will not notice and or complain. And I think that that's to me good enough. I'm sure there are some audiophiles that would not be happy to hear that, but for my purposes, and I think for 99% of everyone else's, this has been great. All right, and I think that that about wraps it up. So that is how I built out my video podcasting studio. Hopefully you found some stuff useful that you can apply to your own space. I plan on doing a part 2 to this on how I'm taking this space and kind of building a little bit more of a business out of it. And I'll probably do that in a separate video. But for people that are just interested in the gear and how I put it all together, I thought that this would be a good walkthrough on how I did that. And if you guys have any questions, concerns, comments, whatever you want to say, put it down in the comment section and I will get back to you. And as I think you're supposed to say on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, and stuff. So yeah, we'll see you on the next one.